I hope at some level you're thinking, I should hope so, man. It's kind of what I'm counting on. Otherwise it's nihilism, isn't it? And grotesque self-importance, isn't it? Well, let's see. Because the whole question really rotates around two understandings. One, what constitutes wisdom? And two, what constitutes inheritance? What's the mechanics of inheritance? So, I would like to restate the question to make the first question appear a little more starkly. Can you inherit prejudice? Hell yeah, you can inherit prejudice. I'll go further. That's the only way you can come by it. That's how fundamental prejudice actually is that you come by it the way you came by your mother's milk, basically. Most prejudice come in so early in life that it never presents itself to you as a prejudice. What does it present itself to you as? The way my family was. What my people tended to, that's the way they talked. And so it's a little embarrassing, you know. But part of it is like, solid shit though. So, can you inherit prejudice? Yeah, because it's in the mechanics of inheritance to make prejudice available to you. And I'm suggesting to you by that, it's in the mechanics of prejudice to not be able to make wisdom available to you. So give me another 2 minutes on this idea. The word prejudice, if we set it loose from its recent racial connotations, what do we have? The word is, it's more important to know its etymology than it's to know its racially charged sensibility. And it's this. It's very simple. Before, out ahead of time. Judge. The claim to know something ahead of the encounter with the something. That's what it is. Okay? Now, is it in and of itself pernicious and monstrous and so forth? Well, God knows it goes that way. But is it in and of itself, is it? The answer is no. No. It's a fear-driven, virtually instinctual attempt to establish a degree of authority about something over which you exercise no authority. You have no prior knowledge of it, so you establish a prejudice to compensate for the absence of the knowledge. Who does such a thing? People who are addicted to certainty, that's who. And, you know, the competence addicted among us are the most prejudicially derived among us as it happens. So what of wisdom? Why is it not inheritable? The kind of idea I'm suggesting to you goes like this. It is in the nature of wisdom not to be transferable from one time and place to another, which kind of takes care of all those, you know, world religion compendiums and kind of messes with the Joseph Campbell thing quite thoroughly, I'll grant you. So could you say a little more? Well, maybe this. Could we grant the possibility that all things wise have a couple of things in common, and none of them are content? Because the content of wisdom literally changes from generation to generation. And that's the good news. Why? Because all wisdoms are site-specific. That's why. Because every wisdom rises from the dilemmas and the torments and the sutures of its time. It rises in response to and is a child of those dilemmas at the same time. It delivers you to the troubles of your time more than delivering you from them. That's what constitutes enduring wisdom. That's the irony. The content of wisdom does not endure. And that's why you do not inherit the wisdom of your priors. What you do inherit from them is their willingness to pursue the wisdom of their time. You inherit their example, not the content of their achievement. You understand what I'm saying? It's a radically different understanding that allows the content to be site-specific, to belong to its time. You can certainly apprise yourself of it and all the rest. What it doesn't do is absolve you of the self-same work of deriving a wisdom that's a child of your time. So you inherit the glory of their example, but not the content of their achievement. And that's who you claim as your ancestors. That's what the ancestral claim comes to. That I derive pride as a consequence of what they undertook. And that's what they really bequeath to me, is the willingness to be claimed by their times, not to be children of an untutored, you know the word ectopic? A lot of ladies know the word, a lot of men don't know the word ectopic. You think the word pregnancy inevitably comes after it. The word ectopic is Greek, and it means out, ek, as in exterior, and topos, the Greek word for place. It's a fallopian tube pregnancy, and it means a pregnancy out of place. And that's what wisdom has come to be now, as far as I can tell. Most wisdom is generic, free-floating, utterly non-indigenous. As long as you understand indigenosity, it's got nothing to do with skin color or whether you're a friend to the trees. The word indigenous is a very clear heredity and meaning. And if you're going to use it, it's proper that you learn the word. The word has two parts to it, in. So just like it sounds in English, it locates in a particular place. And then the gen root of the word signals to you, we have so many words in English to have this, right? Generative, genesis, generic, general, genuine, generous, and so forth. Lots of words. All of it signals something in the order of being called or summoned or conjured, or the way by which you come to be. Reassemble the word. What is indigenous now? You are made as a child of a place. That's what it means. It's a place-based identity, not a human-centered identity. Indigenous people have their identity as a consequence of their home place, not as a consequence of their relationship to each other. When you don't have a place-based capacity, you derive all of your sense of place and purpose and from each other. And if nobody awakens to that, who are you now? Okay, so finally, you could say that it's in the nature of each generation to be called to its spirit work by the travails of its time. The willingness to take that up is what constitutes a generation. I'm not describing this as an inevitably successful arrangement, because I'm not even know what success would mean, but I called it a willingness to undertake the work, minus the rewards, minus the assurance that it's all going to be fine if you do it. You see? So here becomes the unfortunate part of the formulation. What becomes of a spirit work that is not undertaken by a given generation? Does it just, wow, no problem, it just will slide to the next generation? Well, in fact, that is what does happen. But you begin to see some sand in the machinery now, if that's what happens. Because the undone spirit project of your predecessor doesn't become de facto your spirit project. Because what you're contending with now is the truancy of your predecessors plus the travails of your time. This is a wicked combination because it's virtually impossible to discern the difference between them. Now, your time becomes the smudged fingerprints of those who came before and nothing more. And with this in mind, you begin to understand, I think, the extraordinary depths of the phosphorescent hostility that young people harbor towards older people. Because they don't even get a chance to have their own time-bound travail. Virtually all of their travail is a prolapse of their predecessors' unwillingness to stop proliferating. I'll just leave it at stop proliferating. I think you know the gist of what I'm referring to.
So, Stephen, a lot there in terms of content and beautifully framed language to help us unpick it. I'm interested, if I can, to understand a bit more about what elderhood is and perhaps what it isn't.
I find in these matters to begin to articulate what it is not is immensely helpful. It's not an exercise in futility, you know. It's not a bottomless list. No. But it's immensely helpful. And the way you could sort of formulate it, the feel I'm trying to give you now, it's a bothersome thing, I grant you, and probably not what you're counting on. But it could go something like this: with a disciplined and principled inquiry, your capacity to serve your time is extraordinarily enhanced. because it's a very engaged discipline. Disciplined, principled inquiry. That's what you hear me doing in these formulations, is pursuing something linguistically to try to make it palpable. So here's another one. You familiar, and this building is certainly familiar with the phrase doubting Thomas. Anybody not know? Because I happily fill it in for you if you, churchgoers, all of you. Well, you could tell me doubting Thomas story, but anyway, I'll save you the anarchy and I'll tell it very briefly. So you've got, the morning after. Ooh, it's a bad morning after too. And Buddy has, their friend has been, in the most savage conceivable way, killed. And come Sunday morning, of course, they're all there in deep lamentation. And then, as the story goes, there was 10 when they started lamenting, and they look up and there's 11. Don't forget dude with the money, so he's gone. But there's the rest, right? And so what happens is 10, I gotta get the math right, it's 11, 10. So 9 of them take a knee immediately. This is what the story in Acts tells you. Take a knee immediately. Translation, they take it at face value that he is risen, and there he is sitting. Sorry, not to indicate you precisely, but there he is right there. And all of them take it on faith. That's the word I want to identify for you. And one of them does not. And this is the guy that's been saddled for all time with the word doubting. And I'd like to retell the story by way of this understanding of what constitutes elderhood and how might you approach or pursue the understanding. So I submit to you, Thomas wasn't doubting at all. Thomas was the only guy that was willing to love that man. The rest of them assumed the faith position so as not to have to love him. I know that's tough language. What do you mean? You obviously have a very specific meaning of the word love in this context. Yes, that's right. So I'm setting aside, I'm distinguishing love from faith here, obviously. And I'm saying faith by definition is an unwilling to test and to try the thing that you are, quote, committed to. What did Thomas do? He said, I'm paraphrasing now, I am willing to know the death of everything I held dear by putting my fingers in the wound, in the end of it. And he was the only one who was willing to do that. The rest of them didn't go anywhere close to the end of what they held dear, and immediately turned his death into a transition. The way New Age people try to turn your death into a transition, and not the end of anything, but the continuance of something. The victory over death, by the time Paul gets a hold of it, that's all it is. It's a symbolic, what? Heroic journey. That's what he turns it into within 10 years after the death in question. So I hold up doubting Thomas as a practitioner of radical love. The willingness to learn the goneness of what he held dear constitutes his capacity for love. By the same token, then, you could employ the same understanding and say your willingness to know elderhood in a time like ours is probably best understood by virtue of your willingness to know its absence. And this is an act of fundamental devotion to learn the goneness of the function of elderhood. What you see me doing with my hand, fingering the edges of the wound of its departure from among us. And here's the quiet irony of the willingness to do so. I submit to you, in an elderless time, it may be an inadvertent visitation of elderhood in our midst that you are willing to finger the wound of the goneness of elderhood. Should I say that again? Or was that a discerning silence? It's hard to tell. But it's a very hard thing to hear the first time it's said. Because the characterization begins with me saying elderhood functionally is gone from among us. Where? All over the world? No. First of all, I'm not an expert in all over the world, okay? And I'm not an expert. So, but everywhere I've gone, it would appear to be so. The desire for people to come to a talk on elderhood is one of the signs of its goneness. The fact that somebody's written a book about it is a sign of its goneness, not its presence. So, okay, so that's the predicate. That's the beginning of the formulation I just offered to you. It is very confounding because if you hear it at the level of the nihilistic declaration that there's no more elder function among us, basically, then why did you carry on with the sentence? Why do you just say that and say, any questions, have a good night? Do whatever you want because it doesn't matter. Why did you continue with the sentence? Okay, thank you for asking. I'll tell you why. Because these things are alchemical, not predetermined. They're alchemical. And alchemy means there's valence and there's not a lot of constancy. And stuff can happen and stuff can flare. And by virtue of different combinations of things, mysteries unfold, and they're not reassuring so much as they're confounding. So here's one. Here's the formulation. The willingness to undertake doubting Thomas's radical love of his time took the form of his willingness to learn the end of the reason for his life. I mean, I can't overstate the depth of the courage of that. So if we take that as a model of contemplating elderhood and, quote, doing something about its frayed edges, you take his example and apply it, what could it sound like? That I begin with a declaration of the goneness of elderhood as a function from among us. Not complete and utter, but functionally speaking, it's an absence now, not a presence. The willingness to learn that absence, the real depth of its nature and consequence, is agonizing and anguishing, and the least you can do if you're over 40 years old. It's not personally rewarding, but you've got to remember, every time you undertake that kind of work, somebody half your age is watching you. That's where it's happening, not how it's working out for you at your relatively advanced age. But somebody's watching, and you're not in control of what it means to them. Okay, so those are the stakes. Okay, so you learn ever more deeply the consequence of the absence. You grieve accordingly. You feel the absence in your own life, even though you're at the age where you're supposed to be occupying that office, but without any predecessors to give you a sense of even what the office is or what it looks like. You know yourself to be fundamentally a pretender in this regard. If you're willing to be honest with yourself, I'm not sure it's a disqualification, but I'm not sure it's a qualification either. But that sense of being a reenactor rather than an actor inhabits these kind of arbitrary declarations of I'm an elder and I'm doing this, which I hear frequently enough. It seems to me, then, it might be the mark of an incipient elderhood in a time bereft of elders, to be willing to testify faithfully to the goneness of the elderhood function, and to learn it deeply, and to inhabit that goneness long enough that the realization begins to ensue, though not necessarily with you, that this has become a new iteration of the elder function. The willingness to testify to its absence becomes an elder function and begins the strange amoebic reconstitution of the function. But to flee towards certainties and solutions and reassurances and, mass Mooney wedding style events where everybody just self-anoints and anoints each other, and you're fleeing from the thing that would secretly qualify you from undertaking the work. Because your understanding what an elder is comes from never having seen it. The tragedy of it is it's almost unspeakable. I do these elder things for the last year, okay? And adamantly. And I can tell you this, people leave in every one of them. And I can tell you this, not one young person has left one of those meetings. Now you know who's leaving. And you know what the older people are doing? They're exercising their right to fundamentally disagree with my characterization that the elder function is in disarray, disrepute, dishonor, and all but gone. They take it personally. I'm not saying they shouldn't. But what they're also doing is defending themselves against the goneness of the thing. And the way they do it is they leave. And the one thing they're not doing when they exercise their right to flip me the bird on the way out is wondering what the consequence might be in that meeting for somebody who's in their mid-20s watching an older person stalk out of a meeting about elderhood. They're not standing around for that. You're damn right they're not. And that's my case made, sadly. I mean, I take no joy in pointing it out. You see, as you can hear, I'm in the thick of it now. Right? Just give me 1 second, I'm almost done. So, all of this is to say, principally, that elders, in my understanding, are not people. They're not personality types. They're not particular wrinkles of character and all the rest. That you've heard me use the phrase a couple of times, now I'll use it. Elderhood is a function, it's not a person. So it's somewhat liquid. It doesn't attach itself to one person's particular ways of being themselves and say, that's it for now, that's the template. Everybody be like him or be like her, and then you'll be guaranteed to be benign the way she is or whatever it is, you know. That's politicians. Politicians are personality types. But elders are the vanquishing of personality type because it's all function and no inherent content. And one little reading.
Cool.
Okay, excuse me for taking over. Clearly I've done that by now. I'll just read you a little something here. It says it in a pithy and rather abrupt fashion. And it just goes to the word. ALT is probably the older form of our word old, alt. When it's used as a prefix today, it means something like high, as in altitude. And it carries a subtler association of fully done, something like having become complete. That's what you'll get from any dictionary. That's the ALT part that gives us our word old. But the much older and more widely geographically distributed form of the word is AL. And like the ancestors of most of our words, AL was a verb and not a noun. Here you go. The very thing I was just saying. Signifying something that was performed or done, which is the semantic predecessor of all our nouns. In this case, we can translate it in its two functions. It means coming to fullness, and it also means causing to become full. A completely different function. Coming to fullness and causing to become full. In other words, the meaning of AL in English, Old English, is used to describe, the word is used to describe something that's both an incarnation of the idea of fully realized and an agent of full realization. It's a potent idea. The presence of something or someone who's deeply achieved has the consequence of prompting or fomenting deep achievement, both by example and by inducement in others. There's nothing in the elderhood function that's teaching. All of the elderhood function is practitioner-based, not teaching-based. In other words, you needn't to look no further than an elder to find out what the elder function is, because they're not pointing elsewhere, which is what teachers do. They're inhabiting the function for now. And one more step on the thing is this. If an elder is firing on all cylinders, they will cease to be mandatory to the proceedings. The elder's function is to work themselves out of a job. To elder the culture so profoundly that the elderhood function does not reside in a person anymore. That the function is liberally and democratically distributed across the whole culture. Now you have old people who are not on the hook for being wise every friggin' minute of their lives. They get to make old person's mistakes, make old person farting sounds, the whole thing, and just shuffle around the joint. and lead you to believe that they're past it, which relieves them of having to be icons and exemplars, you see? Because they've already done it. So it's the same thing as if you really had security, you'd have no enforcement branch. Because the security forces are supposed to work themselves out of a job. And the politicians should be doing the same, and the firemen, that's not an easy one. But certainly the religious people should be doing that, working themselves out of a job by liberally, making available all of the wisdoms that apparently inhabit just that office. So you could say finally, that the elder function principally is to become obsolete. But there's no danger of that anytime soon, because it's become irrelevant instead. And the irrelevance is a consequence of its absence, and its obsolescence is a consequence of its presence. So let me thank you properly by saying, you may not know the consequence and the power of your willingness to consider these things for me, but you've been a witness to why I was born, you see? Not only that, but you give me the opportunity to remind myself why I was born, and to inhabit as fully as I'm capable of in the short period of time available to us, what I've been entrusted with. And you have no idea how scant an opportunity that is for me. So you have granted me a remembrance of why I'm not dead yet. And I'm deeply honored by your willingness just to attend to these things. Our agreement among each other is irrelevant. Our willingness to be there, minus the obligation to be all of one mind, that's the glory of the thing. And I feel tremendously held in some real esteem by your willingness to do it. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.